And this is often the way I see many professors working with e-learning. It's the main model used in most universities where they do e-learning. These are the early adopters, the ones who've seen the technology, got the vision of what it can do, and they're absolutely essential for change, because if they didn't do this, most institutions wouldn't have been aware of the potential value of e-learning. The early adopters are often very dedicated, and in fact they have no alternative because there's no help for them. But there's lots of problems with the Lone Ranger model. First of all, as I've mentioned already, it's too much work for one individual. Secondly, the quality is often poor. These are professors who are trained in physics or chemistry or humanities, but they're not trained in web interface design, so the navigation through the materials is often difficult for the students. The graphics are often poor because they're not graphics designers, and often the goals aren't appropriate for e-learning. All they've done is to take their classroom goals and try to teach the same classroom goals through e-learning, rather than looking at some of the newer goals of, in other words, they've used it for information transmission. Now, you can use e-learning for information transmission just as well as in a classroom, if not better, but it's not the best use of e-learning. It's also very idiosyncratic. Each professor creates their own materials, and as a consequence, there's no economies of scale. I'll give you a very good example. 3 professors, in this case pharmaceutical science, are each have an online component to their face-to-face teaching. A student goes into Professor X and says, "Professor X, can you tell me if the diagram in your course is the same piece of equipment as the diagram in Professor Y's course, which I'm also taking?" And when they go and look at it, it's 2 completely different diagrams. It is the same piece of equipment. It has different name even on both courses. 2 professors working independently. What they decided to do is to come together in another model, not the Lone Ranger model. But what it means is that if you develop something very idiosyncratically, nobody else uses it. Now in UBC we have 27 courses in statistics in 5 different faculties. And each one, there are professors developing their own animation of a normal curve of distribution. Now, sure, if you're an agricultural scientist, you may use the normal curve of distribution in a different way than if you're a physics teacher. But nevertheless, it's still the same normal curve of distribution, and you would think that if you got them together, you could create one good animation and get it shared between them all. You could take the different descriptors off and still keep the animation. And lastly, and this is probably the most important reason, Lone Rangers, because they're dedicated, they work hard and long, are putting off other professors who are saying, wait a minute, if that's what I have to do to use technology, I'm not going to do it, because I've got my research to do, and while I can see there might be some advantages in the classroom, I'm not going to do that unless I get help or support from the institution, and I'm not going to work my butt off doing that because I'm not getting any reward for it, which is quite true. So it's a very sensible decision. What professors really like is the boutique model of course design. This is where preferably just three doors down the corridor, there is a really bright young grad student who can do all kinds of whizzes with the web, and you go in and say, look, I've got my PowerPoint slides, can you get them up on the web for me for next week? So that's a boutique model. A boutique model because it's custom designed to each individual professor. Just like a boutique shop where you go in and get something specially made for you. And of course, boutiques is on-demand technical support. However, often the questions are technological, not educational. For instance, there's a difference between saying, can you get my stuff up on the web, and what's the best way to use the web for teaching? That's a different kind of question. But they don't ask that question usually. Secondly, it's high cost. Boutique is always more high cost than off the shelf because it's individually tailored, it's a personal service to each professor. It's very difficult to manage. Here's our 2 professors in pharmaceutical sciences. Professor X has gone in and said, get my slides up on the web, and I'd like it for next Wednesday. And on Tuesday, Professor Y walks in and says, I've got this really important job. I've got a class tomorrow. Drop everything you're doing and get my stuff up on the web. Well, what does the support person do? How does he decide that Professor X's work is more important than Professor Y's? Whatever he does, they're in trouble. It's not scalable. It's difficult. It's all right when only 5 or 6 professors want somebody to help them, but when it begins to spread across the department, then you have to hire more and more people, and then it gets more and more expensive. Collegial materials development is where a group of academics work together. Maybe not for a whole course, but to create animations or learning objects that can be used by different professors in the same course. But sometimes it can be whole courses also. And here the idea is to create and share materials. So you create something yourself and put it into a bank, and you can borrow all the other things in the bank and use whatever other people have done. And in order for that to happen, collaboration between universities is essential. And that's not always easy to achieve. And lastly, the model that's used in creating any media products in business and industry is project management. If you make a movie, it uses a project management model. If you do an advertising product, you use project management. Project management's not rocket science. It's well known in many industries. You establish a project which has a start and a finish date. You work in a team. The team in a university will be a professor or instructor plus an instructional designer or course developer plus a web designer. And you have a schedule. You have a start and stop date when the professor will work on this. There's a budget and an output. It will be a course or a learning object or something. A budget will include not just money, but time. So, for instance, at UBC, we would say to a professor, you want to do a standard online course. Let's say it's fully online. It's easy to calculate that. We would want 12 days of your time, presuming you've already taught this course, you have a curriculum for it. 12 days of your time to develop it, and then we want you to teach it at least once, and that will require about 80 hours of your time over a year to teach that course. And if you're not going to teach it, we need to be able to hire an instructor who can teach it under your supervision. And so and then we design back from that allocation of time. In other words, we say, well, we've only got 12 days, so what can we do in the 12 days? That's the way to control the workload. Don't do the other way, saying, well, I want to put the course online and we'll keep working until it's done. You work back. And of course, that's exactly what you do in a classroom. You're given 3 lectures a week or 3 labs a week, and you have to fit all your teaching into that. And funding is linked to project management. If you don't work in this mode, you don't get the support to do it. So what you can see then is a continuum of design. If we take our previous continuum from classroom aids through to fully online, then as you move across that continuum, you need more technical help, more change in methods, and more upfront money. Sorry, I'll go back. I went too fast. You wouldn't want a full project management model if you're just adding it as a classroom aid. You must be prepared to do a bit more work yourself. Maybe with laptops or with classroom aids, a boutique model would work quite well because it's a fairly small amount of change. But as you move into mixed mode and distance education, then you probably need a project management model and you need to work in a team. Also, universities need new people if they're going to e-learning. Obviously, you need the networks and the hardware support. As more professors use the technology for e-learning, so they need more network and hardware support in terms of people.